Ça, les écoles reviennent tout le temps. Les profs, quand ils nous connaissent, ils reviennent tout le temps.
C'est un sujet qui cartonne.
Ils reviennent
dans les
avec
écoles,
toutes les classes différentes chaque année. Ça, ils sont, ça, les écoles, c'est à fond.
Ouais.
Mais on essaye aussi d'avoir des entreprises sur le jeu de rôle, comme un team building, un peu. Ils s'éclatent, les gens.
Ça, vous voyez, moi j'ignorais, mais je vais vous envoyer des gens.
Non, mais on fait ça aussi pour ça. Je me demande si on doit prendre le micro. Facile.
Oui, moi je viens de Bruxelles.
Oui, oui, il vaut mieux.
Oui. Paris, ça reste faisable.
Ah bah, je suis bien placé pour le savoir. Je le fais 3 fois par semaine quasi.
Ouais.
Tu me dis le top. Ah oui, non, comme ça. Ah, ok, d'accord. Ok, très bien. On est déjà en ligne? D'accord. Ah oui. Ouais. Il ne faut pas faire de pub en ligne, hein. Je vais le faire oralement, mais je ne vais pas montrer le livre. Bonsoir à tous.
Good evening. Good evening, one and all. Can I start now? Not quite yet. We are live. Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, but you will not be filmed because we'll only be filming the panel, so don't worry about that. But your questions will be a part of the debate. We have approximately an hour and a half ahead of us for this debate. I think we can begin. Good evening and welcome to this debate. Can fashion be sustainable is the topic, and this will support the exhibition that is in the Europa space. It's the 1st of October, bringing together a wonderful collection of dresses from designers across Europe that use sustainable and ethical practices or upcycling practices. And I thank them warmly for being here with us this afternoon at Europa Experience. They are online and we are live on LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube, and so we are here for this debate on national and European legislation that curbs the impact, the significant and disastrous impact on the environment of the textile industry, not just on the environment, but also the social consequences of the textile industry in the EU and in the world. Only 1% of textile waste is recycled today, as a reminder. So, with us today we have Pascal Canfin, who is on his second term at the European Parliament. He is today... He's also written a book, Win the Green Deal Battle. So, what has happened to the Green Deal? And it talks about, has it been unpicked? It talks about the battle surrounding the Green Deal. You are part of the Renew Europe group. We have a second MEP with us here today, Saskia Bricmont. So she is from Belgium. Thank you for being here. You are part of the Greens group. You are alternate at the Industry Committee and the Single Market and the Trade Committee. And we also have a French MP, so not an MEP, Anne-Cécile Violland. She is here and we thank her warmly. You are a member of the Horizons group and you are the author, the author of a bill in France on the environmental consequences of the textile industry. Fast fashion is mentioned, but it's not part of the title of the bill. So the bill has come very far, and we also invited the senator that worked on this bill. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be here with us, but we are all here together to discuss these European tools. Now, Pascal Canfin, could you summarize, I know that'll be difficult, but summarize the levers that the EU can use to curb the impact on the environment and on our societies of the textile industry? And perhaps could you tell us a bit about what happened last week on the revision of the directive of the CSRD? It's quite technical, but you're going to tell us a bit about that. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking part in this debate. Now, there are three main levers I think that we can use and that we are using to try to counter the most devastating consequences of fast fashion, and also on the defensive to try to regulate the industry as a whole and move towards more sustainable practices. The first lever is a financial one. So that has been adopted. It means implementing, in technical terms, a extended producer liability responsibilities. So that means that producers cover some of the cost of the treatment of the waste, and so that is maybe a simple way of putting it, but that is essentially what it means. It means that producing costs more. So this is one lever that does have its limitations if the So if the penalty is a lot lower than your margins, then you can see how it can be limited. So it is part of the solution, but it's not the entire solution. The second lever is also a financial one, and that is to waive the customs exemptions on all parcels that enter the EU, and that today are tax and duty free under 150 euros. Now, most imports, textile imports from China, no matter the website and platform used, most are worth below 150 euros. And so that is true for toys and the textile, and you can and so that is one of the levers. So waiving these customs exemptions. And we're also looking at a minimum, a surcharge on small parcels to try to counter the unfair trade practices that are implemented by Chinese competitors. Now, there's also a different type of lever, which is regulation. So 2 years ago, as part of the Green Deal that I talk about in my book, we passed a text called the Eco Design Regulation. Now, I'm sure you can all picture the little stickers, the labels that you see on home appliances, A, B, C, all the way to F, to say how sustainable the appliance is, and all electronic devices or appliances that did not uphold a minimum energy performance level have completely exited the European market now. So it's not a financial penalty, but now they are no longer able to market their products on the market in the EU. So now there is no fridge in the EU with something worse than G, because that is no longer being able to be marketed on the market in the EU. So we are targeting the industries with the largest footprint. So we started with electronic appliances, and then we decided to extend it to other sectors. So the first, tablets, computers, electronics. As you can see, that you can probably imagine that's highly significant. And the second sector we decided to extend it to is textile. So what are we going to do? Well, incrementally, we're going to implement minimum sustainability rules to access the EU market for all players. I'm not just talking about ultra-fast fashion, I'm talking about all players. So some players will be delighted, I'm sure many of you here will be delighted, and some will think that this is absolutely intolerable. The idea is to curb the use of these types of unsustainable devices. So this is exactly what the European Commission is trying to do by enshrining delegated acts into EU law. So we've set out the principles, we've set out the calendar, and now we have to set out specifically the criteria to be used. And it's easier for a fridge that has one criteria, which is energy efficiency, compared to textile, which is a lot more complex. The textile industry will need several criteria, water, CO2 emissions, recyclability. And depending on what you look at, well, the impacts are very different on the production side and other sides as well. So that work is underway, but the calendar, the timeline has been set out. Yes, the European Commission, which is the executive, the sort of European government, and so that is its role. It's very radical. No one in the world has done this. Does the European Parliament not have a role? Yes, the text has been approved, but it's not our role as legislators to say in 2028 if the manufacturing of a T-shirt used so much water or the cotton used so much pesticides, then it can no longer enter. So we can't do that. That's the Commission's role. But just by giving you these three examples, you can imagine how much analysis and data went into it, and all the transparency and the administrative burden that will entail. And so you are going to have to, no matter your size, the size of your business, you are going to be affected, and we're going to have to have this trade-off that's always really difficult. It's all of our responsibility to determine to what extent we can accept these really detrimental and trade practices that we're seeing, this unfair competition that we're seeing, and that will entail lots of rules and traceability burdens. But what is the alternative to just laissez-faire and to just deregulate? And I think that the sector, the industry as a whole, will have to make a choice, and it won't be easy. And I'd just like to end on due diligence. So the third lever that I wanted to, or type of lever that I wanted to talk to, I can't go into too much detail, but so first is financial levers, second, rules, and third, due diligence. So that means implementing a risk monitoring system, so social environmental risks across all outsourced contractors, and take action to cut down impact. So for instance, I source in Turkey and India, and I know that there's a lot of risk there due to river pollution or forced labor. And I have to, as a business owner, have to determine that there's that risk, and that means that I have to directly engage in a conversation. Now, this might be a subcontractor, to a third, fourth, fifth degree, but the idea is that you will have to take action and engage in dialogue with that subcontractor if there is a risk. So it's quite a controversial piece of legislation. Now, it is subject to a lot of pressure from business, the FEP-MEDEF in France, BDI in Germany, and their counterparts in across European countries, except northern countries in Europe. They're in favour. Negotiations are underway to determine whether we need to simplify or not this due diligence. And so on Monday, this is what you mentioned, and we will disagree on analysis, and that makes sense. But on Monday, we reached a compromise that some deem still consider the legislation far too strict for companies, and so some will not vote in favour of it. But others, and you will maybe mention this, consider it too lax, and so they may not vote in favour of it either. So we'll see what happens in the end. Now, the compromise that was found is that there are two types of liability mechanisms in this legislation. The first was a legal sort, so you seek the legal liability of the company. Now, that mechanism will no longer exist at a European level. Now, it will exist in member states. It's the case in France, but not in Germany. So there's no European harmonization. And so I thought that was unfortunate, but that was part of the compromise, which is important, or else we would have lost the entire legislation. Second, financial penalties. And so you may have heard of the Digital Service Act, you know, Meta and TikTok, and these rules that are imposed upon them. And the idea is to apply those same rules on textile businesses that are completely outside of the EU world, which is China. So China does not, Shein, for instance, does not respect any EU legislation. But with this piece of legislation, it will be mandatory for Shein to map those risks across its supply chain, including on goods that they don't necessarily sell in Europe. Now, I may be mistaken, but when Shein places orders with subcontractors, they don't know what T-shirt will end up where. Well, it will end up in the United States, in India, or in the EU. So for all sales in Europe, that would be an obligation for Shein, no matter where that end up, where the garment end up. And so that will have a major impact, and that's why non-EU businesses, China and the United States, are up in arms about this legislation. So we kept the financial penalty just like on the digital services, which can reach 5% of turnover, which is immense. So I think that in spite of what we've lost, and I look forward to hearing what you're going to say about it, but the essential parts remain, and that now this industry will become part of the European due diligence framework. Thank you, Mr. Canfin. So maybe now I'd like to hand over to you to talk about due diligence, but not only. Tell us more about other levers, perhaps. I'm thinking here of waste management. You didn't mention that, so the obligation. Saskia, Bricmont, you have the floor. Thank you, thank you. It's wonderful to be here in Paris, the fashion capital of the world. I'm going to tell you a bit about myself. If I weren't an MEP, if I didn't go into politics and to defend sustainable textile, I would be one of you. I'd be a designer. So it is an honor to be here and to see so many stylists and creators and designers in one place. Can fashion be sustainable? Well, I won't talk about due diligence just yet. Well, I feel like hopes have been dashed when it comes to due diligence. We all have in mind the Rana Plaza tragedy, when the world's eyes were drawn to working conditions that are the reality of many workers. And I think that we've seen, when Rana Plaza happened, we saw lots of different brands involved. And so international standards in place, and thanks to civil society organizations' work, we've seen some legislation. So that was, this has been in place for 15 years now, this discussion to try to push this legislation forward, to try to ensure that working conditions, social and environmental conditions across the supply chains be different and be better. The Green Deal and this green momentum was part of that, and thanks to the work that was done by those that came before us, because I've been at the European Parliament now since 2019, and so this work began before me. But we have managed to approve, to get this through, this directive on sustainability due diligence. So it's for companies, or initially it was companies with a turnover of 450 million euros. And so there we thought, you know, it would be good for this directive to cover everyone, to be applicable to all businesses, so that we all move in the same directions in terms of sustainability due diligence. But that was the fruit of compromise, and so that was the fruit. So it was 450 million and 1,000 workers. So those were the two criteria for to be covered by the legislation. Now, politically, this is a little bit dogmatic. So since the 2024 European elections, now that was just a year and a half ago, and we've seen this green backlash, and the European conservatives, supported by the far right, that, you know, have made ecologists, environmentalists, their enemy. And so we've been in the same bag as wokes and lefties, and, you know, that need to be stopped. And so the European Green Deal went way too far and will harm the competitiveness of European companies. That's the narrative. But the Green Deal was thought with competitiveness in mind, to boost competitiveness and to protect the future of the European economy. That's what really changed mindsets during the previous terms. And, you know, consumers have supported this this due diligence directive. But now we're seeing this backlash, as if, you know, the green movement had gone too far, and so we've had to wind back these regulations. Now, this is one example, but there are many more. Far too many pieces of legislation have been reopened, and so the idea is to try to reduce not only the number of companies covered, but also the scope. And so now the threshold is 1.5 billion turnover to be covered by legislation. And this is in spite of the fact that many companies, you know, in Belgium and elsewhere, have said, we want this due diligence directive for fair competition among companies. And many businesses had anticipated this legislation and its entry into force, and now are being well harmed, or risk being harmed by this walking back on this legislation, and this is really harmful. The progressive groups in the EP should have come together and had a shared front in the face of the conservatives, and you know, and the right, if it wants to join forces with the far right, and that's a decision they're going to have to take on for the next 5 years. And, you know, the right will tend to turn to whoever it can, depending on the circumstances. But if we can't just spend the next 5 years opening up legislation that we have actually already approved, legislation that would have meant that we can actually move forward on all of these green and environmental issues. So I am quite upset about it, and this has only just happened, and we're voting on it in plenary next week. And I want to say, you know, move, wake up, and contact your MEPs and help us take down this new this motion. So the idea is a mandate, so it's a mandate to reopen negotiations, right? Yes, but politically it's important that this message be clear that we don't want to walk back on this legislation. Now, today, you are being affected by the totally unfair practices that you're seeing with fast fashion and ultra-fast fashion and e-commerce. This is not regulated enough. Politically, I think that we need to recognize that China is a problem, and this unfair and almost war-like trade practices that we're seeing on the part of China is a real problem. So these platforms are being heavily subsidized, and that's having an impact on global markets, but also on the EU market. So there's the reform of the customs codes, and now that is still ongoing, and the small parcels tax. These are all steps that will mean that we are moving towards greater regulation. But then, of course, the problem is checks and audits and capacity to check. So these platforms aren't covered by the EU legislation. And what is not compliant, for instance, in the food sector, anything that isn't compliant cannot enter. But we're seeing lots of non-compliant fake items coming in, and so that does show that you know, there's a problem when it comes to enforceability. So that is one thing that needs to be boosted, and I think the reform of custom codes will cover that, and will set up a European authority that will be able to flag problem parcels and problem imports from partners, and obviously one comes to mind. Chemicals. Now, chemicals is another area that we are seeing backsliding, and so that is the REACH regulation on chemical substances. And now these PFASs that you see in Belgium, you know, that there's a scandal in Belgium, but elsewhere as well, these substances that we find in our food, in our clothes, and in our view, these substances need to be banned, prohibited, because there's no other way of getting rid of them. And I'm sure you're familiar with the idea that our clothes, or at least fast fashion and ultra fast fashion clothes, have lots of chemical substances in them. So 8,000 substitutes of chemical products have been identified, and so we need to really work on this and to make sure that these substances are banned in clothes manufacturing processes. And this could lead us towards more sustainable fashion if, you know, this is regulated at a specific level.
Dont j'aurais pu parler, mais je...
There's a lot of things I'd love to talk about, but yes, we'll. Well, one last thing. In the Green Deal and the strategy for a circular economy, which has led to the eco-design regulation with the digital passports for products, which is supposed to have all of this information that Pascal was talking about for clothing. There's one thing that's missing, I believe, and that is the support to you, the designers, the producers, and who want to redefine the industry. Of course, there's the global challenge of decent pay, decent working conditions in global south countries who are currently manufacturing our clothes, but there's also an issue of relaunching an industry which used to be alive in Europe once upon a time, but it's gone with new raw material such as linen or hemp, or seeing a new dynamic, and that's things that are happening, but not everywhere. And so the EU has a fundamental role to play, so that in its agricultural policy there is also a push to dynamize industries which can support the textile industries. And of course, we need land for both food and clothing. So that's something that's missing currently at the European level. Everything happens all together, trade, agriculture, and of course the whole supply chain, from design to growing to actually making the clothing. So that's something that's happening. And the whole issue is here. If you want to have sustainable producing on top of upcycling, etc., if you want to produce sustainably, it's complicated at the moment in Europe to have short cycles. Thank you so much. I'll let Pascal Canfin go. I think he has other obligations, and I'll ask Ronald van der Kemp to join us on stage. He's one of the creators, the designers of the exhibition. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you, Pascal Canfin, as well. Anne-Cécile Violland, I'm turning to you, and Ronald, you have the floor afterwards. So there's this French draft law. What is it about? What does it add to the European regulation? What have been the obstacles and the challenges? I'll give you the floor. I'll let you explain to us what are the objectives of this draft legislation, which has not been adopted yet, but it has gone through the Senate and National Assembly once already. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today. And I'll start by saying thank you for inviting me to discover this this place, the Europa Experience in Paris, which I did not know about before. And I'll let my my network know about it, because it's a great place, and I think everybody should visit. And also a few words for the designers in the room. Those are truly art pieces that you've made through upcycling and other practices. And also, short mention, I'll say hi to Xenia Schneider, who's come all the way here from Ukraine, and of course we know that we're with her. So thank you all. So the French Parliament, and then first the National Assembly, drafted this law, and what did you do to face these challenges? And I think it'll bounce on what Saskia was talking about earlier. I don't want to come back to the environmental degradations that were already mentioned. The goal was first and foremost environmental, for a group that wasn't created specifically for that, but that's not something we wanted to do. Our political group really wanted to carry this project because of this need to react in the face of this invasion of our economy and our planet by fast fashion, ultra fast fashion, which is an environmental and economic nonsense. So it's both environmental and economic. I think the two go hand in hand. Saskia said it, Pascal has said it as well. The environmental harm by these practices are huge. The impact on our health as well, for the people manufacturing the clothes and the people wearing the clothes. And I think we're this close to finally understanding all the implications. So in the face of this huge issue, we've worked with many actors, NGOs, journalists, elected officials. Of course, we paid particular attention to what happened in the Rana Plaza. Obviously, that's started the whole thing in a way. And of course, we also exchanged with fashion actors, François Maille, for example, Olivier in the room as well, who have given us tremendous support, and actually they're going to continue doing so because we're not done yet. So that's what we wanted to do with three concrete things. First, informing and educating the consumer on what is ultra fast fashion, what it implies, what makes it different from traditional fashion, which is that mass production in third countries in conditions which I haven't described it in detail, but it's really exploitation of people. We can talk about the Uyghurs, of course, but they're truly abhorrent working conditions. And it's offering 900 times more different models or different pieces of clothing than the traditional sector. If you go on Shein, that's what you see. The numbers aren't precise because it's they're voluntary declarations, but basically somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 new items published every day on the website. So as well, the prices are extremely low given the working conditions, so there's really tiny prices, very attractive items, and extremely intrusive advertising, especially targeting young people. So it's about informing the consumer on what it is and what the consequences are on the environment. So that would be, for example, having a label or a mention of what ultra fast fashion is, kind of like what we have for food in France about eating not too salty, not too fat, etc. Second lever is trying to, rather than have penalties, have incentives. With this extended producer responsibility, we basically having the polluter pays principle. The more you pollute, the more you pay. We're going to use this principle of extended producer responsibility and add another penalty on top of that to really have strong punishment. The more there is pollution tied to the product, the more you'll have to pay. So we might go all the way to 5 and then 10 euros per item. So how are we going to calculate that? We have a methodology in place which will give a grade, a score, with different criteria, which will allow us to give an eco score to every product, depending or reflecting its environmental impact, and it will lead to penalties, which will be much higher than what exists today. For example, because there's already an eco tax tied to items, but the problem is we don't know how much, for example, for this jacket you've paid in terms of eco tax because it's not on the label. So we're really fighting for these eco taxes to be truly written out. There are for appliances, fridges, etc. They're there, but not other sectors. So we have this penalty, and then we've added to that, or coupled to that, a bonus. So if you are producing items or products respectfully of the environment, you can have access to a bonus, which has already been enshrined in French law, the eco bonus, which could be improved, but it's there, it exists, and we're going to strengthen this program. And so all this corresponds to this methodology. I don't want to explain it in detail because it's not necessarily what's interesting to you tonight. I mean, it is because that's what we're going to negotiate at the Parliament. But this methodology will be a tool that will allow us to calculate a score. In France, we have a Nutri score. We'll have the same for environmental impact of clothing. And it'll start actually very soon because brands will be able to opt in to already have this eco label on their products. And then the third thing is banning any advertisement for ultra fast fashion. So no advertisement whatsoever on any form of media, not even influencers, no advertising at all, to just cut the story short for them. So compulsory mentions of an ultra fashion, the bonus, the penalties, and then there's a distinction made between fast fashion and ultra fast fashion. That's a decision we've made to really be particularly harsh on ultra-fast fashion. And for those who have already started turning to better practices, we're trying to encourage them so that they could improve further. So that's why we have penalties and bonuses for the entire industry, not just ultra-fast fashion. But of course the penalties will be modulated depending on how much you pollute, basically. So, where are we in terms of process? The National Assembly has voted it unanimously. I mean, you're telling about the European Parliament. Believe me, it's even worse in France. But we've managed to adopt a few things here and there. And I think this draft law shows that sometimes parties can come together and find a common way of working. Pascal was saying it's extremely political, but it's in the good sense. I think it's very political. It's really about defending values, a version of society where we do not want this ultra-fast fashion to exist anymore. So from the far right to the far left, parties have come together and voted on a draft law unanimously. So those who thought it was too harsh and wanted to lower the constraints on businesses, and then those on the other side who wanted the draft to be even harsher, we've managed to come together and agree, because we realize that currently no country has adopted legislation on something like that. So France could be at the origin of something new, and that's what we're going to do. So it's really a multi-partisanship effort, and we really thought we could do something together, and we managed. Same thing happened at the Senate. Unanimous agreement with a few amendments because they have different visions, and that's all well and good. So that's where we're at. After these two stages, National Assembly, Senate, we then turn to the EU for an opinion. So the European Commission, we asked them for an opinion on the draft legislation, and we're currently expecting them to come back to us with some feedback on the draft. And actually the Commission has said that some articles may need to be redrafted because it may be not in line with European law, for example, the e-trade, e-commerce trade, or the other directives and regulations of the EU may not work well with this draft law. So now we need to get back to the Commission, tell them, okay, we've heard your comments, but we're not going to level down our ambition. We're going to try to be even more incisive and debate with them. And again, I'd like to thank all our partners. So, for example, I work with Pascal at the EU, but we also have colleagues from other parties who we keep working on this project. The textile industry representatives, everybody is mobilized to be successful. Now, on the tax on small parcels, which has been introduced at the Senate level, given that since then the new U.S. president was elected, there was a draft budget this week in which is included the small parcels tax of €2 with potential amendments to increase it. So it's a new source of revenue which would allow us to fund customs and other fraud-fighting entities. To be honest, that's kind of our Achilles heel. The lack of control, because the legislation doesn't allow us to do it. All these parcels are not checked. So not only do they not pay taxes, but they introduce products that are completely uncompliant and harmful, potentially dangerous to our health, to our environment, to animal health. So it's unacceptable to continue working like that with these unfair practices, because our craft people, our producers do comply with our regulations. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the textile industry, of course, but also other industries, furniture, food. Obviously, the textile industry is sort of the first step, but there will be many more. We have no choice. If we want to come back to fair competition between all actors, we have to change these. Thank you so much, Anne-Cécile Violland. So before we move on to taking questions from the room, I'm sure you have many questions. I do want to give the floor to Ronald van der Kemp. You're a Dutch designer, so one of the designers that's taking part in this exhibition during the month of October. You want to introduce a new ethic in luxury fashion. I'd like to know what the challenges that you've faced. Have you got to this idea? How you developed your project, and how you managed to defend it? Yes, and if you don't mind, I'll answer in English because I'm more comfortable. Do they need to? Okay, go ahead.
25 years in New York, Paris, and Milan, always in luxury fashion, and I saw the change happening, and I saw that luxury fashion was sort of taking the business model from fast fashion, starting with one of the biggest French brands that we're all very proud of, doing 10 collections a year, and this is when I realized something's wrong here. I also realized that as designers, we have a real power because fashion reaches everyone. The problem is with sustainable fashion that it's apart from the real fashion world. So when I started my brand, RVDK, I didn't talk about sustainability. I just used things that were already there, so nothing new. I made new things with nothing new. But in the first 2 seasons, I didn't talk about it. I just invited my favorite editors, and I was lucky that, for example, Emmanuelle Alt, she was the editor of French Vogue. She was a real fan. She introduced me to American Vogue, and they all started looking at my stuff without really knowing what was going on. So I felt it was better to be an intruder in the fashion world than commenting from the sideline and telling everybody what's wrong. I wanted to do something positive at the highest level, which is Paris couture. So I started this very slowly. Then, you know, Kate Moss started wearing my stuff, Katy Perry, even Michelle Obama. And these people became influencers for my story without them even knowing what I was talking about. And I was talking about sustainability and about ethics. So I just wanted to show that it's possible to do things in a positive way and, you know, get impact. The idea of upcycling I introduced, and I saw a lot of followers on that part, a lot of, you know, of the brands here, like people are doing upcycling, which was a word that didn't exist when I started it. My point of view is that we have to watch luxury fashion the same as we watch fast fashion, because there's so much wrong there. The big influencers of luxury fashion that are sitting on the front rows at Paris Couture and at all the shows, they really have the power to change the world. And if we would only change them to see what they're actually doing, because they're teaching the young girls to buy fast fashion, sitting there front row, dressed by all the big brands, in new creations every 5 minutes. You know, going to every party, going to the Met Ball and all these big events. I mean, I think this is where the problem starts. We have to change the people and make them aware in a positive way. And I think right now you don't reach people by telling them what to do. People don't want to hear anymore. I think we can reach people by doing something beautiful and by making them realize that it's actually done in a positive way. And I think this is the biggest message that is very important right now, especially with, you know, there's so much extremities in the society and so many different point of view So if we start talking about those kind of things, I think we just get into fights, and this is what we see. So I think the idea is not to talk too much, but to show people that it can be different. And this is our role as a designer. So I wish we would be asked by the politicians much more about how this can change. Because I think there's so many great, I mean, France is really advancing with all the initiatives on fast fashion. I think it's really amazing what you guys have achieved, also with the European Parliament. But the problem starts at the top, at high fashion. And this is what all the girls that buy fast fashion see. And this is what they're following. So this is what we need to change. We need to change everybody's ethical beliefs. I grew up with I'm a little bit religious, but my parents taught me certain things, and these values sort of made me who I am. And I wish we could give the youth those values, that they understand what their impact is from everything that they do. And if we could reach that, I think we would change the world, and we would need to take all those measurements. It's a very sort of romantic idea, but I believe in it. And on top of that, I think we need to do research in thinking about, like, what can we do to get people to buy something from a fashion brand without actually buying something physical? Can we think of new products that aren't actually physical products, but let's be creative and invent things that aren't there. Like, what is the new perfume? What is the new experience that people are willing to pay for to become part of the dream that fashion is, without actually buying physical products? So many products are now being produced, and they're all disposable from the luxury brands, because people want to be part of that dream. So wouldn't they want to spend money on an experience or something that I can't think of, but maybe anyone in this room can think of, or anyone in the world can think of? There's so much to discover, but let's focus on something positive, and let's focus on making fashion a positive thing that can have a positive influence on the world. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Ronald van der Kamp.
Thank you so much, Ronald van der Kamp. So, with this last intervention, I'm sure that everyone's creativity has been tingled, and you have many a question for us. I do see quite a few hands being raised. You, sir, I don't know if we have microphones that we can take to people. Thank you. And please briefly introduce yourself. Hi, Olivier Duquetti, president of the textile industries in France. In the late 70s, 400,000 people were being employed in our industry. Today, it's 60,000. So this is already quite a bit of damage that's been done by fast fashion. That's one thing. But I can't let you say that there is no textile industry in France today, because there's still 60,000 people, and there's still a value chain in France and in the rest of Europe. And it's a shame that Mr. Canfin's gone, because I was quite upset by this. But I'll start with the positive, to be nice. Anne-Cécile, I really admire your work. I've had the opportunity to sometimes work with her as best I could, and we tried with my colleagues from the industry to contribute to a solution that is pragmatic and that works. At the EU level, at the Commission, at the Parliament, how can you accept that things take so long? The world is changing so fast. There's this madman across the ocean who's adopting executive orders every day, who's overnight adds penalties and taxes and duties, and I mean, it's working what he's doing. And so now I'm listening to you. It's fantastic what you're talking about conceptually, but concretely, it's not working. Since 2023, with the Fast Fashion Act, or the legislation being started, last time I talked with the Ministry of the Economy and Finance was 18 months ago, and I was warning them about the de minimis, the 150. There's 800 million parcels that were introduced on the territory whose worth was under 150 euros. So that goes under every radar. How can we not react faster? Why don't we react faster? We were told early 2026, and then the very slow elephant that Europe is trying to do something. And you, I mean, I'm saying you, but it's not you. It's nothing personal, obviously. But now you're sort of really deflating the motivation of businesses and harming our belief in Europe, because you're moving so slow. And then the rise of extremism, but there's such a lack of motivation, there's no belief, and we're wondering why MEPs tolerate that things take so long and that things are so slow. You really are living in a different world than us, than businesses, where everyone, I mean, not everyone, but everybody who's in the industry is bleeding dry. And I mean, when we're talking about a lack of action and vision at the French level, honestly, same thing's going on at the European level. There's a real disconnection, and you're very smart people. When you're talking, we can only agree with what you're saying, but concretely, it's not working. So when is somebody going to say, wake up, do something, actually act, decide, and stop taking 5 years to go from an idea to a product? Last example, I had my first working meeting on the eco-labeling. The first one was in 2019, 6 years ago, and everything was set back to zero at the European level. France had its own project. It's not compulsory, and I understand why, because if things change again in 2 years, we might not want to make it compulsory now. But now Europe's going to take 3, 4, 5 years. Maybe it'll never actually lead to anything down the road. So how are we supposed to be happy with that? How are we supposed to support you, MEPs, and the Commission, when the feeling is that nothing's ever going to change? Sorry, I don't want to be a party pooper here, but it's the truth. I just want you to realize that this is our experience, and we're kind of fed up with it. Okay, no, we fully understand the sentiment. I'll give a minute to the MEPs to think about what they want to tell you, especially on this timing, how things take a long time at the European level. And in the meantime, we'll take another question, or unless, how about these small parcels? Is this going to happen at the French level before the European level, or the other way around?
Mr. van der Kemp, I really liked your criticism for the luxury industry. I think it's often a part of the industry that's not being addressed, and as you say, they are the one driving the trends and holding that part accountable, and especially also this, I guess, with the whole savoir-faire kind of history in France, it's kind of evading some of the critical discussions and things that it should be addressed to. And then to just switch to my question, je vais le faire en français. Donc, je veux juste parler un peu de la partie.
I would just like to talk a little bit about what you were talking about EPR. So France was the first country that has done this for textile, and that began in 2009. And then there's the refashion organism that's in charge of that. So if we're looking at higher contributions, my question is, how will this money be used? I am a PhD student at the French Fashion Academy, and I've worked on this. I've been to Uganda, where they receive 15 million pieces of clothing per week. And so this is money spent by polluters. So we're talking about EU legislation, but it does reach the industry globally. So for countries, rich countries, global north countries, France and the EU, the end of life management of textile waste is to export it to Ghana, but to other countries as well. So how can we avoid any hypocrisy? How can we avoid this? And we're always talking about circular economy, but why can we not implement it? We've been talking about it for ages, and I think it's becoming a bit of a myth, this circular economy. For instance, in Ghana, there are 30,000 people that work on it and that are able to recycle thousands of pieces of clothing per month. And when one luxury company does one capsule of upcycling pieces, 20 pieces, we think it's amazing. But, I think that there's a real disconnect here. And overconsumption and overproduction is not mentioned in the text. How can we continue with business as usual, with linear practices, and just add a little bit of circular? I don't think that will be enough. So I think that's 3 questions. Who would like to answer first? Thank you for your comments and questions. I am actually in full agreement, but I'm not a suspect because at the Single Market Committee there was a report on market surveillance, and the European Commission recognizes that checks represent this much, and seizing produce is only a tiny bit as well of the entire equation, and penalties an even smaller amount. And so when we seize a piece, the whole batch isn't considered as non-compliant, and so it's really difficult to enforce. And so I talked about the problem with China. If we do not cut off imports from China, then we will see the closing of our European partners, our European companies, and they are trying to compete, going online, but they are facing this flooded market, flooded with products from China and Shein, Temu, and so on. And so it's a real emergency. And regarding the time it takes to pass legislation at the EU, well, this timeline is shocking. And especially when you do actually get a piece of legislation through Parliament, and then on the governance level, it's, it just seems completely absurd to reopen a piece of legislation that has not even yet been enforced, and to unpick everything that has been built up by field actors for years. So France has contributed greatly to boost the European far right, Belgium too. All countries have. So far right now, in alliance with the right, are in a majority. And they are not groups that want to move towards a sort of better Europe and to move things along faster. When I often have to talk about what's going on, I'm sort of on the fence, because if I talk about it too much, then I'm going to boost Euroscepticism, because I'm always criticizing it. I want to be positive and say, this is what we want to do. But the thing is that we're so far removed from getting to where we want to be. Yet we have everything we need to protect this industry. But protectionism today is completely taboo. We cannot talk about protectionism in Europe in liberal vocabulary. And so we see the problems, we know what's going on, but we keep opening up our markets and leaving these doors wide open to unfair competition, and just putting patches, band-aids to little stopgaps, these small parcels. I mean, in conjunction with other regulations, they will make changes, but by the time this is enforced, the customs code the reform isn't yet implemented either, and so the small parcels legislation isn't not enforced yet, and so we have to work it through all national systems. France is a tricky example to move this customs code reform forward. So I agree. And not only is it slow, these debates that take so long, but then when we unpick legislation, it goes even further than that, and it means unpicking the EU as a concept. The cordon sanitaire with the far right is actually contributing to the EU sort of slipping away, and we're seeing things deteriorate in front of our very eyes. And this is the far right's agenda that is materializing. These are the populists that are really moving, that are really pushing for this agenda. And so I am with you. I am trying to work at the EU level to change things. And when we are faced with emergencies such as the one we are talking about today, then of course we need to be able to handle that as well. Now, there's so much linked to textile. When you pull a thread and you realize that it unravels lots of other different things as well. It's linked to extended producer responsibility, the fact that they're going to have to pay for the future waste that they make, that we're seeing also a provision about cut in exports, but the fact is that not just second-hand textile, but also textile waste, a textile that cannot be worn any longer, end up in Ghana, in Chile. France 24 has made a wonderful documentary about it, and that actually was broadcast yesterday in Belgium with Audrey Millet and another representative of a Ugandan trade union, Irene Dandiro, who came along to talk about the impact of EU textile waste on their local life, the pollution that it creates, the fact that there is no recycling infrastructure in place. And so the EU, through the levers that it is using to try to recover some of these funds, should use this money, use these resources, not only to cut down waste, but also to support the Global South where this waste ends up, and help it develop its recycling infrastructure, and to help it with other infrastructure to destroy and manage this weight. But of course the idea is to address the root cause, which is overproduction, because overconsumption stems from overproduction. If we were to stop production today, there are studies say that we would have enough clothes for until 2100. So we are making way too much compared to what we actually need. And I'm sure you all know what the Eiffel Tower is. 170 Eiffel Towers worth of textile waste is exported each year. Can you even imagine how much that is? So the idea is to cut down production and to support and cut down these exportations and to help countries. And actually countries are beginning to ban imports of this waste, some have done on plastic waste, because they're telling us, we need to take care of our own waste. Exporting it is, and textile isn't the only example, but we need to handle it ourselves. So that will entail a lot of work. I'm talking about Audrey Millet's report because the facts are there. The European Commission is doing a lot. There's the Waste Directive that will enter into force in a couple of years, that it isn't yet operational. It's not an immediate response, but it's on the way. Among the recommendations in the report, that we do recommend these pilot projects in these recipient countries and look at what can be done and what can be replicated in other countries as well. The Commission did not receive this proposal very warmly, but we are going to continue to push for this, and it is an emergency, and so we need to act and fast. Can I have an extra minute? Maybe just 1 second. I've lost my train of thought now. Yes, just to bounce back on what you said. In Belgium, there are design schools that are well-renowned, and I think that this is something that we are going to have to discuss at this level. I haven't yet done this work, but over and beyond EU legislation and regulation, I truly believe in your type of action, so initiatives that come from the grassroots. And so I think that what happens on the ground is what drives politics. When there's no support and initiative from citizens, companies, makers, creators, and in this particular instance, fashion designers and luxury designers, well, change doesn't come. Schools, these academies, you know, they are doing things, but on a much too small scale. And so this needs to be mainstreamed, and we need to really reach all young designers and bring them along with us.
From one of the big fashion schools, your career is good when you get accepted by one of the big houses. And once you get accepted by the big houses, you feel the money, you get the money, and then you're into this world that's not the world of sustainability. And what I'm trying to do with all my interns, there's one of them is sitting right here, is trying to get them to work the same way as I do and try to influence from the inside. And the problem is, if you win an award, you win the LVMH prize, you skyrocket. You start out. I'm starting out with upcycling. You do sustainable fashion, but the moment you become part of the business, you lose it. And I've seen this so many times. I've done it for 12 years now, and I've kept to my principles. But most people, like after 2-3 years, they disappear and they become part of the fashion world. And this is where I think it goes wrong, And I think you all have to know internally what you want to do and stick to it, because I think this is when we can change something.
Merci beaucoup. Oui, justement, j'allais vous donner la parole.
Yes, I was going to hand you the floor, Anne-Cécile, to answer the question on the slow nature of the EU's inner workings. And what are you going to respond to, how are you going to respond to the EU's proposal? What is your visions? How are you going to respond to these obstacles? Well, of course, I agree with what Olivier and Saskia have said. Indeed, from our vantage point, it takes so long, and that's difficult to accept and to understand. But it is a source of security in a way. But the EU regulations and legislation will not prevent us from passing laws on our side. And what's important is to maintain the ambition of the legislation and to try to go further. This can involve bringing new arguments to the table that the Commission hadn't thought of. So there are the Commission's notification says 3 months of status quo of business as usual to have this dialogue, this back and forth between green transition ministries and economy ministries and finance ministries as well with the Commission. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I haven't lost hope because, well, France was one of the first countries to pass a law on extended producer responsibility. So we are recognized as a country that's a pioneer on this area and on the circular economy. And I'll go back to that in a minute. So this means that we can afford to be a little bit ambitious and to say, well, we may be pioneers, and so that maybe we can find some wording that will lead us to a path forward. And hopefully that will speed things up. Now, this legislation, it's the first of its kind, and so it's being replicated elsewhere. Italy has taken note, and Germany as well, and New Zealand as well, outside of the EU, with Australia and Argentina. They want to start tackling these issues because, as we've said time and again, it's a global problem. It's not a European problem. So the idea is to have France as a source of inspiration for these issues around the world. Now, we haven't gone into all the details, but waste is part of pollution, all the more so because these materials are often synthetic materials. So manufacturing, dyeing, washing, 24 billion plastic bottles. That's what it's equivalent to. It is absolutely that's 170 Eiffel Towers, as you said. So you're right. This matter, so over and beyond how we support or curb the problem, but the idea is also to support and to encourage a change in mindset. And under 20 years, our consumption of clothes has doubled, so 50 pieces of clothing per year on average. And we are spending a third less on our clothes, so 50% more with a third less of our budgets going to clothing. So we have to have a change in mindset, but we can't be patronizing and we can't play the blame game because, you know, we all are doing what we can. But by buying things off Shein, then you have to be aware of the consequences for the economy and for the environment. And so oftentimes people say, yes, but what about purchasing power? And this is about taxing essentially products that poorer households want to buy. Well, we're not taxing consumers, but we're taxing the manufacturers. And if companies were a little bit more honest, then they might take that tax out of their profit instead of having the consumers pay for it. But we need to be aware of the fact that instead of buying 5 t-shirts for peanuts, then maybe I could buy fewer t-shirts for more money, but that would be made in France or made in whatever country you live in, and have that on the consumer side. But that's also what we're trying to achieve with our reward and penalty scheme. And so we're hoping to close the gap between the pricing of a piece that's made the other side of the world and something that's made locally. So that's what we're trying to achieve. And going back to exporting, Minister Christophe Bichou, Horizons Minister, wanted for us to ban it completely. Now that is being looked at now because it is absolutely absurd indeed. As part of the legislation that was at the National Assembly, there was an article, a provision, a section anyway, that said a part of this penalty paid, this contribution, so that is collected by Refashion, which is an organization. And so a part of that money collected will be redirected towards waste management structures in third countries. Now that was removed by the Senate. So we're working on the Commission's notification, and the next step will be a bi-chamber committee, and so 7 members of the National Assembly and 7 members of the Senate will come together and we'll look at what we are going to keep. So going back to what you were saying about hypocrisy, well, the circular economy, I don't think we can speak of hypocrisy in France because we have some real gems in France. Just the other day I was with this wonderful project in Normandy, I think they bring together all actors, all sections of the supply chains, and there's a problem with all of these, the entire industry, because we need to change the model. The model needs to change. But we are also completely defenseless in the face of these. We're being flooded. Beaches in Ghana, yes, but we too are being flooded with all of these products, and so we need to really support our industry.
Encore beaucoup d'autres questions.
Thank you, Anne-Cécile Violland. Quite a few questions left, but not a lot of time left. 9-10 minutes tops. There's one at the back, one in front. I see 4 questions. Hopefully the answers will be a bit shorter this time. I don't want to interrupt. I know you have many things to say, but you have to be as concise as possible. You and then you.
I don't speak French well enough. My question is related to labor, specifically labor in Romania, where I'm from. So the job of a seamstress is one of the top 5 lowest paid jobs in Romania at the moment. And correct me if I have my facts wrong at any point. Romania raised minimum wage last year by very little, and it's still not a livable wage by any means. That caused a lot of European Union companies to leave altogether. So how can you deal with this? How can we deal with this?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll take the question and then on va prendre la question.
At the back. I had a question and a comment. So I have an upcycling brand called Vent de Voyage. We make bags with sails. And I think quite a few of us here in the room do upcycling, and so it's a great night, but I feel like we've only been talking about Shein the whole time. I feel that's a bit of a shame. We're not highlighting or shedding light on the stakeholders that are having a positive impact. Ronald was talking about it. This is our main strength. We can talk about the beautiful things that we make. That's our main argument. Try not to always talk about the negatives. For example, in France, I got in touch with ADEME, who's in charge of recycling in France, and they're not really helping us. They're helping polluting businesses to pollute less. But businesses who are already doing upcycling and do not pollute, we don't get help. I'm not asking for subsidies, but maybe we could be showcased rather than focusing on taxing the polluting businesses, which we can't even do. Thank you very much. We'll have a third question or comment.
Yes, of course you can.
I just want to speak from the perspective of being a small sustainable designer, and something that I know that I struggle with a lot, and also my peers in Ireland that are also designers, is the access to the database of how to manufacture within the EU, how to find sustainable manufacturers. I find that it's literally like just hours and hours of doing all this research online instead of there just being, and maybe I'm wrong, but instead of there just being like a database that we can access for sustainable manufacturers within Europe, and also maybe areas where we can access dead stock fabrics, where just so that it's more accessible. I find that there's a struggle there where people want to be more sustainable, and for me, if I want to scale, I just find it really hard to know where to go and how to do that properly. So I think something like that would be really quite valuable.
Une question extrêmement pratique. Je pense que vous avez.
Indeed, a very good question. So having a database of producer. Another question. Okay, let's have 2 more, and then we'll have a round of answers. Lightning fast.
To listen to you, I'm a designer and senior researcher from Estonian Academy of Arts, and the question I'm asking is as a researcher. So we have a house full of upcycling, and we were talking about, or you were talking about the local and global production. My question is that I think it's not so much of where it's produced, but how it's produced, because study shows we have been our research, we have done almost 20 years in industrial upcycling, and the latest study actually shows that product, if we compare LCA, then upcycled product, if we take just a simple t-shirt, saves like 99% of water and up to 94% CO2, less CO2. So, and really, transport is just a really tiny part of it. So, and most of the clothes what we sell right now, maybe I'm wrong if I remember correctly, it's around 80% is actually coming out like from the outside of EU. So how do you deal with that? Not, I'm saying like really, maybe this global, local concept is not actually working if we would like to really consider sustainability.
Merci beaucoup. Et enfin, la dernière question.
Thank you very much. One last question, and then I'll be asking you to answer as fast as possible. Or maybe to pick and choose your answers. Yes, gentleman here with the glasses. I'm sure we can exchange later. Good evening, thank you. I'm Gosha Belaya from Begalia Fabrics, one of the biggest provider of dead stock fabric in France. So we're talking about punitive measures, especially in France with the textile industry. How do you think we could have incentives rather than penalties to encourage businesses to have better practices? Thank you very much. And the last question, and we can always continue our exchanges afterwards.
I'm a fashion designer and I'm also a human rights activist. I work with the EU as a Sakharov Fellow, so I'm very much in between these questions. I was there in 2023 and did a collaboration with the European Parliament to pass the very law that we talked about, the sustainability due diligence and the forced labor ban. So imagine when it passed, I was really happy, and when it was postponed, I was really sad. But then after more than 1-2 years of interacting with factories and people working in the fashion industry, and I was asking about their opinion because I was thinking, I'm doing a great thing, I'm working with the EU, trying to pass this law, but to my surprise, they were not happy about this. They don't think that it helps them, but rather the opposite, because in their experience, what happened before, every time a law and legislation that involves penalty that's involved, what happens is that the brands would then pressure them to or bribe them, or in many different ways, because it's much easier for brands to pay the penalty or pay off the lawsuits rather to actually change the supply chains. Because what we're talking about, the whole reason why Europe have moved out their factories to global south is because it's much, much cheaper. So we can never shoot down a system without having anything in place that's better. So what I'm asking is that it's two questions. One is technical. What is the instruments and mechanism that EU is planning to have to actually make sure the brands are following the rules and not another, greenwashing or paying pressure?
Thank you very much. Yeah. I need to get time to have your answer because Anne-Cécile Violland doit partir. Donc je vous laisse la parole.
Because Anne-Cécile Violland is going to have to leave.
Maybe after, because she has to answer and then she has to leave. So I'm sorry. Okay. But we can talk after because we will stay together.
Okay, but
outside of the, Merci.
Thank you very much. And very briefly, obviously, I'm not going to be able to answer all the questions, but I do believe that everything that's been said by the producers, or rather the designers, is extremely interesting. I think the law shows that it's not only about penalties, it's also about incentives and rewards. The issue, I believe, is that we tend to have project-based functioning rather than long-term thinking. We're currently working on having a look at green taxes revenue and see if we can find resources there. But there's also a whole whole part of it which is about incentivizing. Now, obviously, the way things are built is never really optimal. We realize that, and we understand that we need to facilitate access to these resources. ADEM is really about the environmental transition. It's not just about the circular economy and recycling, but I'd be glad to talk about it with you a bit more. Feel free to contact me, including all those of you who had questions you might have not have been able to ask. My contact infos are on the website of the National Assembly, and me and my team will answer all of your questions. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who took part in these conversations. It's extremely enriching for me. France, Europe are doing fantastic things, and you are the representation of that. The designers are a representation of that tonight. The circular economy, I will conclude, is one of the ways we can reconcile economy and the environment. It's a huge opportunity for us. I'm convinced that it is, and I believe we can keep improving together. Thank you as well for everything you do. Thank you very much, Anne-Cécile. We'll let you go. And what I suggest, because clearly you have some comments to share, and we're eager to listen to them. So we'll have another session on maybe good practices, good ideas, more positive, creative things. What I suggest, if you have another 10 minutes, Saskia and Ronald, maybe we'll cut the live stream and stay in the room to take the different questions that were asked, if that's okay with you. So I'll say thank you and goodbye to everyone who was following online. And clearly, the takeaway is that we need more time to continue this conversation, with more time for the public to make comments, and there's clearly